I want to talk a little bit about my journey to becoming a self-taught software developer. Now, I grew up poor in Florida where you basically have to have a car. But my first cars, I wasn't spending more than like $1,500 on. So I was getting the absolute basket cases that Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist has to offer. Now, this meant that my cars would break and they would break often. And I didn't really understand about how to even diagnose, let alone fix cars. So I found myself hopping on to car forums, reading the old Haynes manuals, and this actually led to one of my first jobs that I got at Advanced Auto Parts. Between working there and working on my cars, I was starting to learn a lot. Things about being able to visibly recognize parts or understanding what attributes are important about those parts. Seeing some of the common failures for them. This started to create a mental picture of the underlying vehicle systems that these parts were made of. I certainly wasn't at a professional level yet, but I was definitely starting to understand more than your average bear. Now, it was at this point I really started to develop a passion for cars and the car culture, and I really thought that that's what I wanted to be doing long term. So this kind of drove me to enroll in a program in mechanical engineering. So while working on this degree, I got a job at a small tech company as a data analyst. This company specialized in vehicle data management, mostly surrounding vehicle fitment and parts information. Now, I felt like I got this job because of that previous knowledge that I had acquired from all the exposure I'd had to cars and the car culture. In my experience, to make good software, you need both the software architectural understanding as well as the domain knowledge. Now, in this case, I was bringing the domain knowledge, but the nice thing is that it was putting me very close to software developers. This was giving me a lot of exposure for how they tackle problems, what kind of tools they use, and when they use those tools. And the nice thing about this being a small company is that there was always room for growth. One thing I would recommend if you're searching for a job right now is to get as close to software developers as your domain knowledge will allow. In my experience, it's often that developers are going to work closely with somebody on the functional side of the business in order to develop this software. So if that can be you, you can get a lot more exposure to developers and how they operate. So initially this started with a lot of Excel work. Things like normalizing data for load sheets, parts classifications, and categorization. I started to do a little bit in SQL. I would use like pre-written scripts in order to do updates for customers that either didn't have a UI or the UI was just kind of cumbersome. But there was eventually a point where Excel started to become a bottleneck. The data was getting quite large. I mean, you can imagine if you had a wiper blade that fits 100 different vehicles and then those all have submodels within it, like this would get unwieldy very quickly. And some of the Excel formulas that I would use would actually crash my computer if they, after taking hours to load. So I began to start to explore other options in terms of this data processing. After being so frustrated about the Excel bottlenecks, I began to do research about other options, and this is when I stumbled upon Python in the Pandas library. So I started to learn about how to manipulate data in data frames, and this was a complete game changer for me. Excel formulas that used to take me hours to minutes to run would now run in seconds in Python, and I was absolutely hooked. We worked with a lot of other automotive e-commerce companies, and I began to gain some notoriety about my data skills. So my company would actually contract me out to other companies to help them fix their data. But the next bottleneck that I would identify would be my import process. So previously I was creating these data frames. I would do whatever data manipulation that I needed to do, and then I would export this into a load sheet like a CSV or an XLSX. And then I would upload this sheet via a Node.js API that would basically load this data into SQL via data pipelines. So I started to study SQL more aggressively so that I could start to sideload some of this data, especially when we would get special requests from customers. And a lot of these special requests ended up being repeated, which got me to understand how to create my own new data pipelines and endpoints so that when these requests came in, customers could just do them with load sheets. So I basically took sort of a backwards approach to back-end development where I'm identifying roadblocks, studying when I don't understand something, and then ultimately removing those roadblocks to make myself more efficient at what I'm doing. And this involves a lot of just always staying curious. But I would say if you're somebody that is struggling to get into the space, the one thing I would think about is what is your foot in the door? Mine ended up being domain knowledge, but I'm sure there were many others out there. So just start to look at some software projects and think to yourself, how can I contribute to these? I was really hoping to give some hope to the self-taughts out there to let you guys know that, hey, as self-taught software developers, we out here, we are still getting jobs. But that's basically the long and short of it. So if you guys have any more questions, feel free to drop those in the comments, and I appreciate you guys watching this video.